Welcome to this week's installment, Today and Tomorrow in Scottsdale with Don Henninger. I'm Don. With me is my podcast partner and Scottsdale watchdog, Kevin Maxwell.
I am a watchdog.
You're a good watchdog.
I try to be.
How you doing today?
Good. How you doing?
I'm doing fantastic, man.
Good to see you.
We've got a serious topic, though.
We do.
You know, it's an issue. It's human trafficking. It's a problem that most people don't see, but it's part of the world around us, especially in a tourism destination like Scottsdale. And our guest today, Detective Sargent Andrew Parrott, the Scottsdale Police Department. He's a leader in the department's Human Exploitation and Trafficking Unit, and he's with us today. Andrew, welcome, and thanks for being with us.
Of course. Thanks for having me on.
You ready for this, Kevin?
Yeah, I heard of some really cool stuff, presentations that Detective Sargent has done, and I reached out to him and said, you got to be on our show because what you're doing is so important, and it's going to be great for our audience to hear. So
absolutely.
Looking forward to today.
Absolutely.
Hey, Don.
Yeah.
How many episodes we in?
This is number 80.
80. I have never done this before. I'm going to ask for a little bit of co-host license here. I'm going to hijack this show for about 60 seconds if I might.
I think
was that okay?
You got a green light, man.
Thanks, sir. Don, today's a big day. We have a big announcement. You're not going to talk about it, I know, because you're a humble guy. But there is some big news that our audience needs to know about, and it revolves you. Either you can talk about it, or I'll make the announcement and you can talk about how you feel about it. I think I'll go ahead and do that. Yeah. And that is, Don, you were just appointed by our governor of Arizona to be on the elections task force. Am I pronouncing it correctly?
Election Reform Task Force.
Election Reform Task Force.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
Wow. What a great honor that must be. And thank you for serving. I've never been, nobody I know has ever been reached out. The state of Arizona is reaching out to you and asking for your help to solve a really critical problem. And one, they're asking the right guy. I'm sure there's other people who are serving, but what an important topic. You're going to be fantastic. And I'm just so proud of you. And congratulations.
I'm humble, Kevin. And
sorry. There we go. Yes, the audience.
I didn't know we had a crowd today.
We had a studio audience right back in the back.
I tell you, bringing a statewide audience, that's crazy, man. Well, that's Kevin. Thank you. And you know what? It's a privilege, and I am humbled by it for sure. You know, it's all tied to work I'm doing with the Carter Center here in Arizona, where we have the Arizona Democracy Resilience Network. We've been working on this issue for about 6 months, and we're going to take it into the election in the 2024 season. So, I think the governor recognized some of the work that we're doing and trying to do good things for the community, and now I'm one of about 16 or 17 members of the task force. They're going to try to figure out how to make some recommendations to the governor and to the state legislature about what we might do of our election laws to make them smoother than they are now.
And when do you guys get to work? When do you guys start?
They just announced today we're going to probably have our first meeting. They haven't scheduled it yet by the end of this month. And then our report to the governor is due by November. So,
is that right? Well, fairly quickly then.
So we'll have to move pretty quick.
Yeah, right. And that'll be well in advance of the 2024 election.
A year out of the election, exactly.
Yeah, okay, yeah. Well, good. Well, once again, congratulations. I'm really excited for you. I know you guys are going to do some really work. We talked about that. We've talked about this in the past a lot, not about you being on the task force, but about this, about the work you do with the Carter Project. And so this is a natural progression from that. So,
well, I'm excited about it, and I think we can do some good for the state. So yeah. I really appreciate that.
Okay, let's talk to Detective Sargent.
Speaking about doing good, we've got Andrew Parrott here. And, before we get into the issue of trafficking, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself, your background, where you grew up, and how your career journey led you here to Scottsdale?
Yeah, so thanks again for having me on. This is a great opportunity to let people know kind of what's going on inside the community and kind of what's really out there. Well, I'm originally from Ohio. I came out here in 2006 and joined the police department in 2008. I worked patrol for about 3 or 4 years where I became a detective, and I've worked in the domestic violence unit. And then most of my time was spent in our special victims unit, which at that time also covered human trafficking. We didn't have the resources we have now. We weren't Phoenix PD, we weren't LAPD, and we really had to identify the problem that was here, but we just weren't pinpointing it the way we do now. In 2018, I became a supervisor. I worked on patrol for about 9 to 10 months, where I went back and was the special victim supervisor. Then they moved me over to our violent crimes unit. And so I ran homicide or death investigations and did that for about 4 years. And then just recently took over the human exploitation and trafficking unit in about September of this year.
I don't think people realize how big of a problem it is in Scottsdale and maybe the whole valley. One of the, a couple of reasons. Tourism's a major industry in Scottsdale, and we've just experienced an unbelievable run, a couple of weeks of special events between the Super Bowl, Phoenix Open, Barrett-Jackson, where millions of visitors came here. Unfortunately, when you get that many visitors here, it includes a lot of bad actors too, who are drawn to popular destinations to traffic victims. So Talk a little bit about what happened. You guys did an immense amount of work. I know that during those 2-week periods, probably more than ordinary, I would imagine, with events of that size. But you had task force. You were working with multiple agencies. Tell us a little bit about what went into your activities during that time.
So for months leading up to the Super Bowl and Waste Management Open and Barrett-Jackson, there was a joint effort that was all the Valley agencies, many of our federal partners, and then we worked real closely with the National Center of Missing and Exploited Children, which is NCMEC. And we had meetings, 2 or 3 times a week, sometimes more, where we would talk about how we're going to put these operations together and what they're going to look like. Here in Scottsdale, we ran 3 weeks of operations, one during the Barrett-Jackson, then one with the week in between, and then one the week of the golf tournament and the Super Bowl. We used 4 different locations here in Scottsdale. And I can say in my time as a police officer and all the operations I've been a part of, we made 123 arrests in 3 weeks. And we did give the guys a couple days off each week. So it wasn't 21 straight days, but it was about 18 days of work that we did. And over 42 of those were felony charges on people.
Wow.
Which included child sex trafficking, exploitation of a minor, attempted sex conduct with a minor, pandering, prostitution. And then we actually had one guy that tried to run over one of our officers. So we had an aggravated assault on an officer, right. And that led us across the valley with Phoenix PD, and we grabbed that guy. So there was a lot that happened in that small amount of time. And there was a lot of people trying to do some stuff they shouldn't have been doing in our city, and they got held accountable for it.
No kidding. So, okay. First of all, I have like so many questions. First of all, how many arrests did you say you just made?
123 in 3 weeks.
In 3 weeks, 123. Because later on, I'm going to talk about a stat that I'm in my analytics segment, talked about how many arrests there were. That's an amazing number. That exceeds anything you've done before, I'm sure, right?
Oh, yes. Without question.
That's a big number, right?
That's a really big number. It's a lot of work.
Was that attributed to the fact that you had more boots on the ground, or that there was more activity going on, or probably a combination of both? Huh?
So we had a few more boots on the ground, but this is just the Scottsdale operation. This doesn't count the Phoenix operation, the Chandler operation, and the other agencies that also had operations going at the same time.
And they had similar type of numbers, probably?
So I think the total, I mean, I'm not trying to toot our own horn, but I am, but we had 350 total for everybody.
Wow.
And if you look at that number, that's pretty high.
So like 60% of them were in Scottsdale?
Yeah.
Is that because that's where all the activity was going on? This is where all the people, a lot of people were? Or?
I mean, this is where people want to be. And unfortunately, I hate to put it this way, there's a supply and demand thing.
Sure.
And people know that if you bring the business here, people will pay for the business. And so I think it's kind of like, Ryan, see a little bit of Las Vegas. People come here and they kind of just forget, I'm here to party, have a good time, and they kind of let loose. And sometimes that goes a little farther than they want it to.
Wow.
They went into some pretty dark spaces, really.
Yes.
Is there a demographic with the kind of folks that you arrest? Is it all over the board, or is there a particular?
It's really top to bottom in all ages. I mean, we've arrested, unfortunately, teachers. We've arrested, I hate to say it, police officers. We've arrested everybody in this type of work. It's really unfortunate, but I mean, we have 18-year-olds, and then we've gotten people that were 78. So it's really all across the board. And these are people that are sex buyers and people that are moving and forcing people into this business.
That's crazy. Those numbers seem. What were your expectations heading into that period in terms of numbers? Did you have any idea how many people you would be looking at? Or
I have 4 detectives that work for me that I don't know of anybody else that works as hard as they do. I mean, they just have such a passion for what they do and the amount of work they put in to do this. So I knew that we were going to be successful, but I don't think anybody really believed that it was going to be that successful.
Man.
Those are great metrics right there.
So they're all.
I hate to describe
not quite.
Prostitution arrests as a metric. But, hey, you know me, I'm a data guy, right? Everything to me is a metric.
Maybe the word great ain't so good, but those are big for sure. There's no question. So they're all in the court system. They're in the justice system now. At some point, they're going to work their way through that, or.
Yeah. So the one thing that was really nice is during most of these operations, when we were making the arrests, the county attorney and everybody was aware of this stuff was going on, and the judges were giving us very high bonds. Holding people accountable, not letting people back out on the streets to go do the same thing they were doing the night before. So we really felt like we had an entire team effort from top to bottom when we were doing this operation. And everybody was on board to make sure that we really made a stance and showed the world who was watching what we were doing during this time with the Super Bowl. We held people accountable, and we can prove it. We can show you from the criminal justice system, from us to when they saw the judge the first time, it went all the way through the board. And now we're just going to sit back and watch the criminal justice do its thing.
Let them take care of pay the dues, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Wow.
So what's in a normal period? And actually, we're still in high season here. We still have Cactus League in town. A lot of visitors still coming here. What's a normal period look like? I mean, 123 arrests in Scottsdale, 350 across the valley. What would a normal couple of weekends look like?
So, when we sit down and we decide to put it together and we really focus, I would say on a weekend, we could put together between 20 to 25 arrests in a weekend. That's going to range anywhere from basic prostitution arrests to child sex trafficking. Wow. And a lot of this is where we have people that undercover officers that get out there, they put themselves out there, they get involved in conversations, and you just don't know who you're talking to.
Right.
And you don't know who's going to show up. And when you make these arrangements and these deals, you just, you have to be prepared for everything. The one nice part is that, here in the Valley, we work so closely with all the other heat agents or all the other heat units and all the other agencies, because obviously you guys know staffing is a problem across the board.
Yep. We talk about it all the time.
For the United States with policing, we just don't have enough people.
Right.
Well, all these heat units, they're short staffed. Well, the way we fix that is we all come together and we'll work together. So we'll bring 3 or 4 units together. Well, now we can do this thing and we can do it right. And we have people that are watching, we have people that are chatting, we have people that are doing backgrounds. So we know everything as we're putting these investigations together.
That's amazing. So a lot of the activity ends up being around the hotels.
Yeah, we do hotels, but we do things sometimes that are outside the box, so that, because the hotel thing, everybody kind of knows there's a little nervousness when you deal with a hotel, because that's what's on TV, and everybody's seen, Catch a Predator, and the guy walks out and goes, "Hi, you're here to meet."
Whoops.
Yeah.
Well, and you guys do some training program with all the hotels and resorts around town too. You've done a lot of training, right?
Yeah. So, it's been great, and they want to be a part of this. There's so many people that want to be able to say that they were a part of this and help us in this effort to stop this, because this is just such a epidemic that we're dealing with across the United States. But, we've gone out and we've trained the Fairmont Princess employees, the Valley Ho right over here, we've done training for, and they want their employees to be trained to identify stuff.
Yeah.
Little things here and there that, well, that's not that weird, but I saw this, and then I saw this, and then I saw this. And then we give them tools where maybe you call this number as opposed to 911, or maybe you do this, and we'll take a look at it for you. The one big thing, we're in Scottsdale, and there's a lot of bars and restaurants that they don't want, 10 cops with lights coming flying into the front door,
sure.
But they see a problem and there might be something that needs to be looked at. Well, we give them options and resources of what to do when that might happen.
That makes sense.
So so here's my next question, because I understand the problem, but some of the terminology may be escaping me. So when you said you made 150 arrests, was those what's the difference between sex trafficking and prostitution? Right? It sounds to me those were like classic prostitution type activities you're making arrests for, but to me, when I think of sex trafficking, I'm thinking of a third party who's brought to our community to perform, sex work involuntary, which I'm sure happened. That is prostitution, I guess, isn't it?
Yes.
But I guess so. Those two terms kind of intermingle now, or what?
So prostitution, what you would have with prostitution, what the law kind of states with prostitution is someone who is doing. There's a exchange of something, some good, for a sex act, whatever that may be.
All right.
So there's generally 2 people involved in that, or one's an undercover or something like that. And generally when you have a prostitution charge, you have an adult male that's talking to an undercover detective who shows up and they say, "Hi, you're not here to meet that." And there's a misdemeanor charge there.
Okay.
So there used to be a charge on the books called child prostitution.
Okay.
Well, the terminology has changed because a child doesn't have an option to be a prostitute.
Right.
That's not something they can consent to. So the charge of child sex trafficking comes in when you have that, where if we pose as a 12-year-old child and a man shows up and says, "I'll pay you $300 to engage sexually with you," you're going to be charged with a class 2 felony, which is child sex trafficking.
Right.
Now that also is the same type of law where you have someone that's moving a child around and selling them. Obviously there's different categories of this law, but that's where it's going to fall under. And sex trafficking is force, fraud, or coercion is what you're forcing someone to do.
Okay.
And that's how you're getting them to do it. So whether that be manipulation, you're beating them. You're telling them, if you don't do this, I'm going to go after your family. You're holding their papers. There's so many different ways to prove that.
All right. So I think I got some clarity now. So if I'm a female individual and I decide on my own to perform sex acts for money, that's prostitution probably, right? But if somebody, a third party, is forcing somebody, coercing them to do something they don't want to do, that's the trafficking part?
Correct.
Aha. Now I got it. Okay, cool.
Well, kind of what you might be talking about, and I looked at some myths that involve this whole issue. It's human trafficking. The myth is that human trafficking is the same thing as sex trafficking, and it's not.
Correct.
That's what you're getting at.
Correct. And
so human trafficking could be totally, may not involve sex at all. It may just be kidnapping and
because there's labor trafficking, there's different forms of trafficking, but human sex trafficking is when you're forcing somebody to engage in sexual activities, which could be performing. It could be different things that you're forcing them to do against their will by one of those three things that I listed before.
Okay. I'm more clear now.
Yeah,
I can. There's ways that number was like I was having a hard time palating that number because it seemed like really big, but really it's a lot of prostitution in there that are being forced or being coerced.
Yes.
So okay, so I'm thinking for some reason people moving from one location to another, which probably happens too. But anyway, just a lot too that I got to learn here.
A big part of what we do also involves helping the girls, right? And when I say that, so people will talk to me and they're like, you guys just go out and you arrest everybody. Well, no, we don't just arrest everybody. And when I explain this is there's times that we'll make contact with a girl who's, engaging in this. Well, what we're going to do is we're not going to arrest you, but here's medical services, here's these services, and here's these services. And we're always here for you if you ever need help.
Right.
Not to say that we don't arrest people, because we do.
Yeah.
But there's also a side of this where it's an outreach program and we have partners that we deal with that come in and they help us do this. And a success story I can tell you, just recently, we had a girl that we met back in December and we gave her a warning, gave her all these options. Well, just recently, she sent an email to us and said, I need help right now, immediately. Wow. And she finally got to a point where she wanted to turn over her pimp, who she didn't tell us about before, who was forcing her into this activity, and said, I'm done. I don't want to do this anymore and I need help. And came in and gave us an interview and gave us everything. And, that case is moving forward.
That's great.
No kidding. Yeah. Wow. That's great. So you're providing resources then, obviously.
Yes.
Then. Yeah. Okay, cool.
There's a whole
I was hoping you would tell us a success story like that.
That's a good one. Yeah.
Do people reach out to you and say, I'm scared, I need help, and get me out here right now? And they just like you just did. They described. Wow.
But they're not always ready that moment that we make contact with them. Sometimes it takes 3, 4, 5 contacts where we're here to help you, things like that. And then they finally look and go, every time I see a cop, I'm not getting put in handcuffs.
Right.
They actually want to help because, our whole thing is, we want to get the problem where the problem is. And if you're not being forced to do this, then you don't have to do it. So
one of the things that's interesting too, and there's been some reports out of some universities, think tanks and all that kind of stuff that say we overemphasize the idea that this trafficking is related to big events. Now we know that it definitely comes with it, but the point is that sometimes that makes people think that it's not a problem when there's no big events here. And that's exactly the opposite of the truth, correct?
Correct.
And I saw a stat somewhere that said over 35% of homeless youths report being trafficked.
Yes.
And that takes me back to my days when I was working with home-based youth services. We served that group of homeless youths out in the street.
Right.
We saw that every day.
Yeah.
And they're vulnerable and they don't have anywhere to go and they don't have any money and they're stuck and they're easy to prey on.
Yes, that's
still happening 100%
now. Correct. Yeah. And to just, I know he had mentioned that numbers or something, and he's kind of a stat guy. I took over the unit on 9/25 of last year, and I was getting prepared for this, and I just wanted to look to see. But if you took our average, we average arresting 1.8 people a day.
Oh, geez.
Every work day in Scottsdale.
Wow. You mean for
some type of something related to human trafficking or sex trafficking that our unit does. So since 9/25, it's almost 2 arrests a day on average for the heat unit right now.
Wow.
That's unreal.
You guys are keeping our community safe.
Here's the thing.
No wonder I feel safe.
Nobody realizes that these guys are doing this stuff all the time, or this problem exists.
Well, that's why I'm not struggling with the concept because I know it exists. I know it's real. But just for me personally, it doesn't touch my life. I don't see it every day. I don't see it. I don't know anybody who sees it. And just like for something that's so far removed from my personal daily life, it's just hard for me to get my arms around it and understand what the problem is. So that's why I'm so appreciative to hear these great stories. And
the one thing I want to put out there, and I say this at all the trainings we go to, we all see this stuff on social media, you know, and you see that guy who comes in, he snatches the girl on the side of the road. And then, you know, there's this big sex trafficking. That's not the realistic part of sex trafficking in the United States. You know, you can't go snatch a girl at Desert Mountain High School without the entire police department around that school within seconds.
Yeah.
I mean, that's just not going to happen
Yeah.
here. And that's not what a trafficker wants. He doesn't want attention. He wants the girl that's going to willingly come with him. So a lot of these things and how they get these girls and these boys to go with them is through social media.
Is it
It's
really?
through conversations, direct messages. It's these kids that they're struggling at home. Now it could be a North Scottsdale kid that doesn't have attention because mom and dad are busy making money all the time and working, or somebody who's in a really broken home and in a really bad situation and just wants to feel loved. Well, they reach out and it starts out with, I'll be your boyfriend. Come with me. I love you. I love you. And then, you know what? I'm going to be a star one day and we're going to have everything, but you got to do this for me now.
Right.
Oh.
And then it just multiplies into this thing and they get manipulated to the point that they don't even realize where they're in, what they're in until it's too late. You know, another success story we had was this girl came and we met her twice. And then the second time, 24 hours after we met her, she contacted us and she told us the whole story. And she goes, I didn't realize how I was being forced until you pulled me out of it.
Wow.
And she's been great to talk to because she's given us so much insight to the way their minds work and kind of what they go through sometimes.
Have you guys changed some of your tactics or strategies based on these feedbacks you're getting from the victims?
Yes, all the time.
I bet.
And it's constantly changing on what they do when they're recruiting. And
So
how
you
they're
guys are
doing
getting
that.
better based on the information you're getting from your victims then?
Yes.
Wow, that's great.
So
Need to have it. You know, speaking of that, so how, you know, Kevin, you raise a good point. We don't see it, or our eyes aren't trained to see it when it might be there. How do you, what's your advice on helping any, you know, like Kevin or I or any normal citizen? What are some signs that might be there that we should be looking out for?
You know, what I would tell you is that if something doesn't look right, it generally isn't. You know, we have so many people like, I saw that and it just didn't seem right to me and I should have said something. Well, it never hurts to make a phone call and just say, this seems off to me. And we can check that out. Here in Scottsdale, you can call and ask to talk directly to the heat unit. And you can just say, I saw this. I've seen these two people together all the time. She just won't look up. She looks down all the time.
Right.
Just something's off.
Yeah.
That's where we come in and we don't make a big deal. We go in and we know how to investigate that without causing a major problem or causing, you know, all eyes on this person. And, you know, because that's what we get a lot of, you know, people call in, they're like, I just didn't want to be wrong. I didn't want to offend somebody. You know, we live in a great city with wonderful people and people don't want to offend other people. And
Right.
I get that,
Right.
but we know how to do that without causing a big stir. So I always say to people, if you see something that just seems off, just give us a call and we'll take a look at
Pay
it.
attention. But these guys, their eyes are trained for that. I can imagine just walking through the mall.
Yeah.
And you probably walk through the mall in a far different way than Kevin or I would, being trained to be able to observe things that we may never see.
Yes.
So it's important maybe just to kind of be an awareness level there that it's out there.
Yeah. So Detective Sergeant, you probably know what I'm going to refer to because this morning I got early and tried to do some research and prep for the show because we're hardcore journalists, are we not, Don?
Yeah, that's exactly right.
We do research here.
You're darn right we do.
But I looked at a story. I was looking at something online, and it was a story I was going to go back to, but it was all over the news about Scottsdale citizen who did what you just saw something didn't seem right, reported it, and I think that same story was in multiple places. I was going to go back to it, but I got distracted, and I got some stats here I'm going to talk about later on, so I didn't get back to it. But do you know what story I'm talking about? It was a citizen, probably, right?
Yeah. So there was a citizen down here, just south of here, not too far, that saw a male and a female. They were arguing, and it just didn't seem right to them. But then when the officer got there and had conversations, they said, well, you know what? I've also seen this happening here and this happening here and this happening here. Well, the officer goes, you're describing sex trafficking to a T, immediately gives us a call. We came and got involved, and come to find out, once we removed her from the situation, that's exactly what was going on. He was forcing her into all of these scenarios. There were men coming in to see her, she was forced to pay him all this money just so she wouldn't get hurt. But because that citizen saw something that was just off, because they hadn't put the puzzle pieces together. But once we took all these different bits of information, we went, oh, this is exactly what we're looking at. And we were able to hold that person accountable and get her some resources and help. And, you know, he's facing trial. So
Wow.
That's amazing. You know, it occurred to me that we talked about how a lot of this activity happens at hotels, but now we're in the era of Airbnbs. What is the rise of the Airbnb concept? What has that meant in terms of these kind of things?
So I would say the Airbnb, it's kind of just like a hotel. It's a very transient type place where people go and they set up shop for a little while, but then they can move on to somewhere else. And so we get a lot of stuff that happens in the Airbnbs, and especially when we have all the visitors. We have people that come into town and they want to have a little bit more fun than they may have thought they were going to have that night. Well, they may call somebody and want somebody to come to the room. Well, people don't realize when you're making those phone calls, probably not 90, but maybe 80% of the time, you may not be talking to the person you think you're talking to on the other phone.
Right.
You may be talking to a man that's forcing this person to come see you, which happens all the time. Some people, they used to always say that prostitution was a victimless crime. She gets paid. This guy gets to have a little fun. Who gets hurt?
Right.
I have yet to, in my experience, talk to an adult female that we've arrested or come into contact with that said, when I was a little girl, I grew up and this is what I wanted to do.
Yeah.
It just doesn't, there's always this story where they're like, well, when I was 15, I met this person. We talked to one the other day during the operation. She started getting pimped out when she was 11 by a neighbor.
Wow.
And the problem was, she goes, I've never learned how to make money since then. So she still does it because that's what she's learned, but she's a victim. She's a victim. Now, granted, she's by herself and this is happening, but that's the only way she's ever learned to make money.
Right.
And so offering her resources and giving her an opportunity to be a part of the community and get involved is something we want to do.
How do you get, what's the resource for helping these folks once they're pulled out of that? They're going to need a lot of help just to move forward and, counseling and all the rest of that stuff. Do you guys have referrals that you're able to pass the victims on to? How does that work?
So there's a great place here in Phoenix. It's called the Dream Center, and it's designed just for victims of sex trafficking. And they have an amazing program, and many of their workers there are survivors that have gone through it and they were a part of it.
Wow.
And the one thing I will tell you is there's times we bring them in to meet our victims. I can sit there and tell a victim till I'm blue in the face, you're going to make it. This is going to be great. And they look at me and they're like, detective, whatever. You're a detective in the police department and I'm out here just trying to survive. I just don't, you and I we're not on the same wavelength.
Right.
Where I go, well, I would like you to meet Shauna, who was in the same exact position you were in 5 years ago. And now she runs the Dream Center and she's one of the most amazing people I've ever meet, and she knows exactly what you're going through and how you feel. And we make those connections and it changes people's lives.
That's awesome.
That's great.
You got to give them some counseling afterwards or else they're right back in it again, right?
Yeah. There's a lot of things that they do to make sure that they help them and get them on a track of success.
So if I'm somebody who is intent on coming to town and searching out for some of these people who perform these acts, where do you go? Again, I'm so naive. I don't even know. How do they reach out and find? Is it online?
So unfortunately, a lot of stuff is online.
Yeah.
And, Congress a while back, there was a website out there called Backpage. But they shut that down.
It was New Times based here, right?
Yeah. They shut that down. Well, what happened is now all these ads and everything is overseas. So you can post these ads for free and you can put all this stuff up, but we can't shut them down because, they're run out of Europe or they're run out of Mexico or they're run out of a different. But there's thousands upon thousands of ads out there and you just got a phone number and you start a text message conversation and it leads to, I'm at this address, it's $250 an hour and they kind of go from there and that's how it works.
And so you're texting, that's what you're talking about. You're texting somebody, you have no idea who it is. Somebody, arranging this. I see.
Mm-hmm.
That also becomes a source for you guys to investigate probably too, right? Is that one of the ways you can track things down? Yeah.
I guess I'm just so naive. I have this old conceptions of I see some TV where, the sex workers has a pimp. And I guess that, the whole idea of a guy in a van, come into my van, little girl, and get him started. Right. That's probably old school, right?
Yeah. that doesn't happen as often as people think that actually does. So
it's more sophisticated than that. It's definitely more nuanced than that. And I can see why, it casts a wider net.
No question. So, we're a border state. Does that pose any unique challenges for us being a border state?
So I would tell you, we're one of the, for lack of a better term, leaders in the country with, sex trafficking. But I also think a big part of it is that we know it's a problem. So we go after it. So our stats are higher because we have Phoenix PD who leads the nation, Scottsdale PD who we go after these people like crazy. Our numbers are there, but that's because we're working it. If we sit back and we just take the cases that fall in our laps, okay, maybe we have 3 or 4 arrests during the Super Bowl. because you have to proactively stop this crime. This isn't one that just shows up on the door. You know, like robberies, you can sit back as a violent crime detective and somebody's going to rob a Circle K and then you'll go investigate it and work on it. These aren't going to get reported. These don't get reported very often, you know, because it's very quiet. People don't know what's going on. And obviously the offenders don't want people to know what's going on. Yeah. So you have to be proactive. But I really do think that's a big part of it, is that we are so proactive in this state of combating this problem. And especially in Scottsdale, we really take it seriously. And our city council is amazing with the support they give us with this. Yeah. And the state, you know, is coming together and they're providing funds to police departments for this specific problem.
Kevin, this isn't the first time we've heard stories from the Scottsdale PD about being proactive or preventative.
I was thinking a minute ago about that.
DWI stuff.
Here we go again. We've had every single person we've had on. We've had several from the Scottsdale Police Department on. They always talk about community first. Yep. They talk about helping the victim, not necessarily as being a criminal, but how to get them resources and helping them out and viewing them in a different light, which is always so impressive. And here again, once again, we have Sergeant Detective basically honoring those same behaviors we've seen before. And it's wonderful.
What we've seen is the police here would rather prevent something than arrest somebody for doing something. If they can prevent it from happening in the first place, whether it's a DUI or a trafficking case, prevent it rather than letting it happen. Yeah. And arresting later on for it. Yes. So I think that's an amazing, probably a cultural thing, I bet, that may be prevalent in the Scottsdale PD. Is that a fair assessment? Oh yeah. I would say that our goal first and foremost is to keep everybody safe. And if we can just stop the crime from happening, that's a win. It's perfect. Yeah.
Every single time.
Fantastic. Yeah.
I would say that from Chief Walther all the way down to the newest police officer, they probably all have the same mindset.
I have a feeling it's probably part of your training.
Very much so. Yeah.
It's probably when you embed something that in a culture is intentional, right?
They weren't born that way. That's right.
No, that's awesome. Well, wonderful conversation. Kevin, any other questions?
No, I got some information here if you want to talk about it, but thank you so much.
Yeah, let's get into your analytics.
Okay, yeah. So I was trying to figure out some stuff to talk about, this stuff, and Sergeant Detective can back me up on this. But we kind of already talked about my analytics segment a little bit by accident along the way of the conversation. But for one thing I learned today was that human trafficking can be sex trafficking or labor trafficking, right? Combined together, it's one term for human trafficking, but sex trafficking is a subset, or is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. So it looks like, I found some stats in 2019, according to the FBI, Arizona had 53 human trafficking arrests, way before your time, right? So obviously that was an old stat. Right. Only 53 arrests, and 9 were cleared, and only 1 was charged. So I'm sure it's a lot different now, right?
Very much so.
Okay. Yeah. And it says that another thing I found in 2019 that there were 234 human trafficking cases and 150 were sex trafficking. And then you mentioned earlier that in Arizona, unlawfully obtaining labor or services is a class 4 felony, sex trafficking class 2 felony, and trafficking of persons or forced labor is a class 3 felony?
Yes.
Is that right? 3? Okay, yep. I got that right. Okay. What's the difference between those felonies?
So it would be, the sentencing would come, a class 1 felony is going to be murder. Sexual assault, to give you an idea, would be a class 2. So sex trafficking falls right into there with, for people that don't understand, would be forcible rape would be the same as that. So you're falling, and that's going to come with the prison sentence and then everything that goes along with it.
Okay. So unlawfully obtaining labor or services, that's the person who's actually, trying to get he's we used to call him a John. I don't know if we still use that term anymore or not, but is that what that is?
Yes.
Okay. So that'd be a class 4. I see. Okay. But then the person who's actually coercing the individual into those kinds of acts, that's a class 3 felony.
Yes. So if you're, and that would be labor trafficking. So if you're pimping out a child, so you're forcing a child into prostitution, that would be child sex trafficking. So that'd be a class 2. Okay. And it's the same as if you are a buyer of a child. So if you're going to purchase the child for $200 for an hour to do whatever you're going to do, you would be with a class 2.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. All right. Well, I try to bring some analytics and some metrics to this, but it looks like they're so outdated with all the great work and the metrics that Sergeant Detective Parrott showed us that, I'm out of date here. So
not out of date. Some of those statewide numbers were annual as well. You look what the Sergeant Detective just told us happened for the couple of weeks here in Scottsdale and across the valley, which is, taking those times 2.
Well, it's 2019. So I bet you that the awareness wasn't there like it is now. The resources weren't there like it is now. We don't have the dedication of, the departments. Like you have 4 officers working for them right here in Scottsdale.
That's what it takes. I love the idea of trying not to paint a rosy picture. Go out and arrest these folks. And if it takes our numbers up and it looks bad, well, we're still making the streets safer. And that's what it's all, at the end of the day, that's what it's all about, right?
Absolutely.
Wow, fantastic. I'm blown away by every member of the police department we've had over our podcast. There's been 5 or 6 now, just the same sort of theme, culture. It's all consistent. It just blows you away and makes you just admire all the work that our police department's doing for our community. Unbelievable.
Can't say enough about them.
Sergeant Detective Parrott, thank you so much for your service to our community. Tell me how, though, people, if they want to report something, what do they do?
So if they want to report anything, if they see something happening right now, please call 911, obviously. And then you can always just call 480-312-5000, which is our non-emergency number. Okay. You can ask for any member of the heat unit, and they'll transfer you right to us. And then we can have a conversation. And we love anonymous tips. If you don't want to tell us who you are, please just give us the information and we'll run with it from there. Fantastic. Let's do our community good and everybody participate as much as they possibly can. But Sergeant Detective Parrott, thank you so much for your service to our community. So much appreciated. And thanks to all of you for listening today. We look forward to being back with you again for our next edition of Today and Tomorrow in Scottsdale.